Mr. President, my lords, ladies and gentlemen, Rais Jumhur Sharali in London, welcome to London. We have in this hall, this historic hall this afternoon, a true hero of modern Afghanistan, a man with the courage, the intellectual consistency, the deep understanding and love of his country to address that nation's problems. I first knew Ashraf Ghani as the sage of Kabul, the man who'd effectively been President Karzai's first prime minister, the man who'd had the guts to address the problems that his country faced when few others dared to do so. A man who always spoke truth to power, whether it was to the Americans, to the Brits, or to his own fellow countrymen. Mr. President, our heart goes out to you, given the challenges that you face today, not all of them, sadly, of your own country's making. And we look forward in great humility and a spirit of eager anticipation to hearing what you have to say to us this afternoon. My lords, ladies and gentlemen, I give you Ashraf Ghani, the President of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan.
In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. Sir Sherard, lords, ladies and gentlemen, friends. First of all, let me pay tribute to the 454 British servicemen and women who paid the ultimate sacrifice. Let me call upon you to express the deepest gratitude of a grateful nation in a state to their families. Let me also ask you to thank every British veteran who fought with us, who's helped us, whether in the military arena or in the civilian arena. Britain has been a strategic partner, and I'm very proud to be here today. The third wave was the wave of terrorism in Europe, Japan, and the United States. Following the '68 student movement, turning, and of course in the United States, took the form of the Black Panthers and related movements. The fourth wave started with Sri Lanka, that invented the phenomena of the suicide bomber and traveled across to the Middle East and then to Latin America, etc. Each of these waves shook the foundations of political stability and required distinctive ways of dealing with. What comes out of this is that political violence does not relate or is not owned by a specific culture, religion, or geographic space. Any generalization regarding this medium view of history requires careful analysis. What is it that's specific about the fifth wave? A number of characteristics jump. First, criminality and political violence have become organically related. You take the cartels in Mexico or the heroin production in Afghanistan. There is an interrelationship. And this is fundamental to grasp because there is a distinctive form of violence that is inflicted on the citizens and that results in erosion of state authority. Second, networks that previously used to be face-to-face or in small groups now have become face-to-faceless or face-to-Facebook. It's a distinctive form of mobilization that brings rapid utility of information and orientation of people. Recruitment is extraordinarily effective, and replication of cells does not depend on central authority. Thirdly, the space of operation is global. Whether it's Kabul, Brussels, Paris, or London after July, or events in the United States, there's an interlinked series of phenomena. The rapidity, the other point about this is it's probably one of the most well-financed movements in history. Related to this, and if we relate it to the previous things, absence of rules of the game between states and state willingness, the willingness of some states to sponsor non-state actors is fundamental initially to its operation. They pose a threat to state authority, but the rapidity of networks puts our inherited bureaucracies in stretches. Simultaneously, they thrive on weak states. Weak or failing states are the natural harboring phenomenon. But the other thing that manifested itself, of course, with Daesh and earlier, it continues with Taliban, is attempt at state capture. Because except for the movements of national liberation that focused on state capture, the other movements were about undermining state authority. Here, there is a very distinctive phenomena. And last, and of course, needs to be mentioned, its distinctive affiliation with invoking and hijacking a great religion and a great culture. How do they operate? Counterinsurgency was the rage in early 2000. But the insurgency literature, I would argue, in understanding of insurgency is cumulative and much more incorporated. From Nechayev to Osama bin Laden, you can draw a straight line. Into the current thinkers of Daesh and Al-Qaeda. Every second, the degree of knowledge regarding previous counterinsurgency movement is incredibly high. You're not dealing with an enemy that does not know its enemy. But by contrast, we do not understand the phenomena sufficiently. So both in terms of theories and in terms of techniques and practices, there's a great deal of continuity. But simultaneously, there's a great deal of innovation. Where the innovation comes is first in techniques of communication. In terms of network theory, you can see all people who've worked on the phenomena would argue that they surprised the theory of networks. Sometimes 4 to 5 stages of network formation have been passed in a single year or two. And the use of media is fundamental. Why do they attack cities? Why do they attack airlines? Why do they attack public spaces? Because fundamentally what's under attack is the compact between the citizen and the state. The great achievement of the modern state has been its compact with the citizenry. Freedom of movement, freedom of assembly, freedom of worship, and democracies. And those values are precisely what are attacked. Fear is what is the objective. Inflicting fear, producing fear in a systematic manner, ensuring that we live narrow lives that effectively the bond of trust between citizen and state is put at issue. You don't need further evidence. Look at previously open borders in Europe and now the number of controls that have been brought in. Look at what we take daily in any airport and accept it. What we did not accept, except under exceptional circumstances, now we willingly accept. And that is precisely the environment. So here, particularly with Daesh, that is refined the technique, infliction of pain for the sake of pain is not the objective. The spectacle of the theater of violence is critical to achieving this objective. They do not kill 6-month-olds or 90-year-olds just for that sake. It is to awe and overall populations, to ensure that the reflection of violence can destroy our will. Now, in terms of, if I'm correct about the description of this, then we need allied understanding and action at 4 levels: global, regional, Islamic, and national levels. Why do we need global understanding? Because if the threat is medium term, then we need to master the right time horizon and the right alignment. Our understanding has been reactive, not proactive. Because of that, our actions at the global level have been sporadic rather than sustained. Sustained understanding requires different time horizon, and the politics, global politics, is not oriented towards medium time horizons. But this phenomena, like the other threats to global peace and security, requires a medium-term understanding. Second, some regions of the world are a lot more exposed than others, my country being one of those. Who fights in my country? First, I was in Ufa in Russia when President Putin was hosting both the BRICS summit and the Shanghai meeting. And there was talk as to Afghanistan was not in the room. So I posed the question and said, who fights in my country? Chinese, ATIM, Chechens, Uzbeks from Uzbekistan, Tajiks from Tajikistan, even the odd Kyrgyz and Kazakh. But the greatest one, of course, is a huge movement from Pakistan. Then, of course, is all the rejects of the Arab world that are sent on to us. Can anyone point out an historical precedent or a political framework where people who do not belong to a nation and do not have a quarrel internally in terms of rules of the game that have such heavy presence? And the impact of this of course, is global, because the activities that they engage in threaten all of us. Here, my plea is development of common understanding. Not saying that take a national perspective, but take a neutral international perspective, because it is imperative that we understand the phenomenon. If we don't understand the phenomena properly, how can we devise the appropriate means for dealing with it? But unlike, I was in the Munich Security Conference when I coined the term fifth wave, and there was a feeling of doom. But let me again acknowledge that as far as Afghanistan is concerned, NATO is alive and well, and the alliance is delivering. There is no combat role for NATO in Afghanistan, but our armed forces have fully fulfilled the departure of 135,000 NATO ISAF troops and the accompanying 600,000 contractors. This needs to be appreciated in terms of the context, but it also needs to be appreciated that if I'm right about the phenomena, then our partnership needs to have medium and long-term horizon. And of course, the foundation of that is in place, and I'd like to thank President Obama, Prime Minister Cameron, Chancellor Merkel, European leaders, Prime Minister Renzi, and others for staying with us. Last year, we were operating with 9 months as our horizon. And it took enormous political courage by these leaders to make the argument that it was worth staying with us. And I hope that our people's sacrifice, the great sacrifice that our armed forces and our people have done, shows that our partnership is indeed enduring one. Second one is at the regional level. The region, of course, is a concept. It's not a geography. But here, we have a fundamental problem. In the South, Central Asia, West Asia region, what is fundamentally missing are rules of the game defining a system like the Westphalian state. States in this part of the world, unfortunately, feel inclined to both sponsor malign non-state actors or even to use some of their own organizations behaving as malign actors. This is a fundamentally lose-lose proposition. Anyone who believes that terrorism can be classified as good or bad needs to rethink the fundamental assumptions. Because within that, if the other waves or indicator, the extent of suffering needs to be appreciated. There's a fantastic book called Sleepwalkers about World War I. And it shows what state sponsorship of terrorist activity by Serbia did to the whole world. One needs to be reminded to act on lessons of history and not just mentioned. The third level is Islamic. Because the phenomena is being put in terms of abuse of the fundamental understanding in history of this great culture and civilization to which I'm proud to belong, we need to speak back and regain the narrative. An important step was taken last year in 2015 in Mecca, where declaration on definition of terrorism and the weaknesses of the Islamic world were described. Acting on those and making sure that the narrative is not left to a tiny, tiny minority, I think becomes fundamental to the dialogue and understanding of civilizations and the integrated global world that we live in. The other level is national. But the national level, of course, is embedded in these others. Here, what is fundamental is national ownership. We're proud not to be engaging in blame games, but to own our problems. What are some of those? If you take the poverty line to be $2 a day, 70% of our population is below that line. If you take it to be $1.25, 39% of our population is below that line. Corruption is not a symptom. Corruption is an enabler for terror, for political violence. Because what is critical in the struggle against corruption, and it's been proven time and again, is effectiveness of the state. But not an authoritarian state. You have to have a citizen-focused state. And our discussion is manifolded. The two young men that were here are actually protesting about a transmission line. I'm actually very proud of them. Because in the midst of a war for survival, we still take debates on infrastructure extraordinarily seriously. I thanked them the other day when I was leaving for engaging in a discussion of infrastructure. The decisions on the project were made in 2013. A decision was made to pass the transmission line through the Salang Pass rather than Bamyan Valley. It was the wrong decision at the time. But meanwhile, 3 years of work have gone to prepare the Salang Pass. 6 million people will benefit from this transmission line compared to 100,000 from the alternative. But you have to take young men seriously, and I appreciate their anger. Because if you don't have the tolerance for people's legitimate anger, you cannot guide a state or guide the destiny of a nation. We've inherited many things, but corruption is probably the most significant. This is a national shame, as is our mortality, the mortality rate of our women. We have half the mortality rate of women, but it's still one of the highest in the world. What is our tragedy? Our tragedy is that we are potentially one of the richest countries in the region, and yet inhabited by extraordinarily poor people. This means that corruption needs to be rephrased, not as abuse of public office for private gain, but as forms of capture. There are 4 forms of capture that are fundamental to the challenge that we face. First is capture of institutions. Patronage, bribery, is made a mockery of formal institutions. Second is economic capture. Over 500,000 acres of land alone, public land, have been seized by a small number of individuals. Public assets have been disposed of as though there was no tomorrow. The third form of capture is capture of security. Monopoly, legitimate monopoly of force, that is key characteristic of the state, has not been accomplished. Because there are many groups and individuals that continue to use the threat of force to deprive others, to prevent them from a dialogue. Because of that, skins are thin. And the fourth form of capture is political capture. Politics becomes a zero-sum game of competing claims without arbitration. In this kind of situation, what is really important now is to think back. If effective states are key to enabling us in global, regional, and Islamic level cooperation is central to overcoming this phenomena, then we need to agree on horizons and strategies required to overcome the threats posed by the fifth wave. In terms of time horizon, we cannot operate on a yearly basis. We cannot operate in a reactive basis. We cannot be letting narrative be controlled by their actions. It requires a steady focus and the will to master this threat, as previously threats like Nazism, fascism, other forms that have come have been mastered. In terms of strategies, what is critical is to understand that this is going to be a constantly changing phenomenon. It is not a constant, it's a strategic situation. A strategic situation means that there is a large degree of inbuilt uncertainty into the situation. It is going to constantly morph into other things. And that morphing requires that we both focus on the visible and on the invisible. Daesh has taken all the oxygen. What keeps me awake still is what's Al-Qaeda up to. Is it gone down dark and deep? Is it preparing another surprise? Which is going to be the more enduring phenomenon? What is visible or the dog that did not bark? My English education, I hope, is paying. And strategies cannot be in terms of static objectives or terrain that is constant. This is going to be a constantly shifting set of phenomena, relationships, and therefore we need to have flexibility. That is a challenge to our institutional architecture. Being plodding, being slow, being deliberate has served us well in periods of great global stability. Now it requires fundamental rethink about how global and regional organizations will work, how our relationships are defined. One thing is certain: our fates are interlinked. There are no walls, great or small, that can separate us. So what is required is joining hands, being able to forge those partnerships that can enable us to change lives fundamentally, to ensure that stability is of the order in which participation becomes deeply embedded, where hope is renewed, and where trust at all these four levels is reestablished. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I will be delighted to engage you in some discussion.
Well, thank you, Mr. President, for those wise words. Buried in there are all sorts of truths which, if we had followed them, we would have perhaps been better off than we are today. But we've now got about 20 minutes for questions, and I think the first question is going to come from Malcolm Chalmers, the Senior Research Director at RUSI.
Gerard, thank you very much, and thank you very much indeed, Mr. President, for those very interesting remarks. And can I just say, on behalf of the British people here in particular, how welcome your initial remarks were in relation to the sacrifice which our soldiers who did not return made in Afghanistan. I think that was very important. But can I also say that we admire the bravery and also the skill of the much larger number of Afghan forces who have had to sacrifice, continue to sacrifice in defense of your democracy. That's very important for us to see that struggle continuing. I think one of the things, and you alluded to this, one of the actually quite remarkable achievements of Afghanistan since 2001 is that in contrast to some other countries, you have managed to maintain a relatively competitive democracy, a degree of freedom of speech and the media, which many other countries have not been able to achieve. And you refer to waves of history. People also talk about waves of democratization, and this feels in global affairs a time when the democratization wave has ebbed rather, in part because of the real challenges in maintaining democratic institutions in societies which are deeply riven on ethnic and geographical bases and by conflict. So my question to you, because you referred several times to rules of the road, I guess my question to you is, are there any rules of the road, rules of thumb, guidance from the Afghan experience about how you maintain democracy in societies which are deeply riven by conflict and by other divisions, taking Afghanistan as an example, how do you think the rules of the road in Afghanistan could evolve in relation to the political sphere?
Thank you. Thank you for a great question. The greatest British commentator on Afghanistan still remains Monsieur Elphinstone. He made two observations. One, Afghans were the only ones capable of true love. Because we have this phenomena, people run away together, and it was accepted culturally. Second, he observed that it was suited for democracy. This is in 1804. The alternative, he said, it either had to be a really thorough dictatorship or a true democracy. Why the democratic impulse, and what are we doing with it? First, from 1747 to 1978, and then, of course, 92 subsequently, we had no agreed rules of the game. The relation first between emperors and the aristocracy was one of constant tension. It destroyed the empire. Second, relations within internal, etc. Our constitution is our greatest contemporary achievement. Without that constitution, we cannot live. Because it's fundamental to understand that a constitution-based order is the only form of order possible in Afghanistan. I'm the first elected leader of the country to whom authority has been transferred from another elected leader on the basis of the will of the people. This first is a very significant accomplishment. But simultaneously, in the past, the Afghan political class has always been divisive. Rare moments of unity, enormous forms of division. The formation of the national unity government is what I argued the day I submitted my nomination papers. A winner-take-all approach is difficult. If you want nascent democracy to be consolidated, authority is the goal, not power. Third, an open society takes criticism, enormous amount of it. And if you don't have the tolerance, if you cannot have the tolerance for intense debate and criticism, then you don't belong in a democracy. Because you have two ways. Either the waves of resentment are expressed openly, and we debate. And you appreciate and engage in this, or it goes underground. Underground resentment does not remain underground Kipling famously observed, he used some choice words to describe us, but then he said, they know how to shoot, and God help the person who crosses them. In a place where people know how to shoot, controlling the impulse to shoot requires democratic patience. And that patience has to be strategic. Because of this, and the last point, in terms of age, we're the youngest country on earth. So there is both deep continuity, 5,000 years, 3,000 years, you take it. But there's a fundamental change because the younger generation increasingly has no memory of the wars or the Soviet occupation and others. And this requires appreciation. The previous generation takes its standard of evaluation based on the past. This generation truly wants empowerment and wants it now. And this balance requires democratic exchange. Without democratic exchange, you cannot persuade people to engage. We faced 4 transitions last year. The first was security. The combat mission of ISAF, with our great thanks, ended. And how many % of the global commentators were giving us a chance to last 6 months? We're standing, and we will be standing, and we will stand for another 5,000 years. Of course, of course, of course. I love the Hazaras, I love all of my people. Please, 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 sir, this is a discussion for Afghanistan. I will, please sit down, I'll give you an explanation. Please. So could you please sit down so I give you an answer, or do you just want to throw invectives?
Okay, we've...
No, it's fine. It's absolutely fine.
We've got a huge number of people.
Of course, please.
So would you like to ask a
Let
question?
me take 4 questions
Right.
in a row so that more people engage.
Let's have this little cluster here. So the 2 ladies and then the 2 gentlemen behind.
Hi, Emma Graham Harrison from The Guardian. Thank you, President Ghani, and for taking my question. I just wanted to ask, given your speech and events in Afghanistan, do you regret putting so much political capital into attempting to improve relations with Pakistan and seek peace for your country that way? And do you still believe that a negotiated peace is possible, or are you focusing more now on trying to achieve security through military ends? Thank you.
Shahzadi Beg, I'm a barrister. Actually, my question is almost exactly the question that's been asked, which is this, that following the execution of the 6 Taliban prisoners, how positive are you that you can revive the peace process? And secondly, what is the nature now of your relationship with Pakistan, particularly given the fact that the leadership of the TTP resides in Afghanistan?
Of course.
Priyajit Debsakar, author. I want just to carry on with the question is, what do you see the role of Islamabad in the Quadrilateral Coordination Group? Thank you.
My question is somewhat different. Your own defence minister recently said that Al-Qaeda is really very active, working behind other networks. We've just seen Afghan and American forces rescuing Ali Haider Gilani. President Ghani, is your country becoming a safe haven for Al-Qaeda again?
Let me take the last one first. No, because we are destroying them. 5 operations, large camps have been destroyed, but they're not working. Second, there's a displacement effect. There's a 200,000 strong Pakistani army along the Durand line, largely in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. Their operations have brought about a displacement effect. And that, again, is part of the comprehensive analysis that needs to be shaped. But are we ready to take them in those farms? Absolutely. Is the risk eliminated? No. We face a continuous risk because what has been invisible, where the oxygen has been consumed by Daesh, requires careful attention. On those three interrelated questions, first, the quadrilateral process was a voluntary process. All 4 states committed to a roadmap, and their obligations, particularly by the state of Pakistan. Those obligations are that if Taliban groups prove irreconcilable, then there'll be use of force. We're waiting for that decision. Please do not make allegations. TTP is a displaced phenomenon, which has been wrought as a result of the operation of the 200,000-strong Pakistani force. We have gone after leadership of the TTP multiple times. If Mullah Faizullah is 7 lives, that's not our fault. But can the state of Pakistan point out a single operation against Haqqanis or Taliban leadership? Are their addresses not known? Where do they congregate? Where do they meet? Do they not meet openly? Do they not recruit openly? Do they not receive arms openly? That is up for you journalists to discover, but if you'd like addresses to interview, we'll be delighted to provide them with you. Our corps commander for Helmand province went to Quetta and told his counterpart, would you like to take a tour so we can point you to specific locations? That was the former, and his counterpart was the former Director of Military Intelligence, General Riyad. He kindly refused the offer. We have engaged. The minute I became president and the heinous attack on Peshawar happened, we used force. We do not differentiate between good and bad terrorists, and consequently, we face terrorism as such. It is important to be clear. Our relations with Pakistan are based on a state-to-state relationship. State-to-state relationships are not matter of teenage rage or anxiety. States have rights and states have obligations. Our fundamental issue of peace is peace with Pakistan. There's been an undeclared war against us. And that I framed during my visit, and I went to the GHQ. As you recall, I invested, as Ms. Duncan says, enormous amount of political capital to make sure that the road to peace was the proper road. Our extended hand was not shaken. When Afghans face battles of survival, we aggregate, we congregate, and we defeat. And we will defeat this wave. Don't have any doubt about it. Look at our history. But the price is unbelievably high. There is such a thing in a democratic country like the public purse. Our unarmed security sitting in a school, not having a single arm, were butchered without any provocation. And credit was taken for this type of action. We have carried out the full constitutional process, in addition, the full provisions of the conventions, international conventions on human rights, that due process has been observed. This has not been a decision. Every single one of these individuals is killed. Innocent people, they've gone to a supermarket, finest. Ms. Duncan may have reported on it, and blown people. They've gone to a hospital and blown up people. In this kind of situation, the public pulse needs to be acted upon, because the sense of impunity that they had has to end. I deeply believe in peace, but in enduring peace. And the issue, the question is the Mansour group a drug cartel masquerading as a political organization or a political organization using a drug cartel as its means? You have to judge this question. It can no longer be avoided. Inter-Afghan dialogue is intensifying, and we are committed. Violence is not the way, but there's a famous episode in 1941. Churchill was advised to seek peace with Hitler through Mussolini. He didn't. And history changed. There are moments when you have to stand for legitimate use of force because the defense of the values of the Constitution, the values of human rights, women's rights, all the other rights. Who are we posing a threat to? Do you know of a single Afghan terrorist who's blown himself up? Why are so many being sent to us? And Tehreek Taliban of Pakistan is becoming the greatest threat to the region. But it's a displacement effect. And we need to cooperate. And that, again, my answer is state-to-state cooperation regarding stable rules of the game, predictable rules of the game, addressing without prejudice, but in a really constructive manner, our collective endeavor is essential. Today, Dr. Abdullah is representing Afghanistan, inaugurating CASA 1000 project. It's a project to take power from Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan to Afghanistan to Pakistan. It shows that we are engaging where our common interests are. TAPI equally is going to move, and there are other projects. We need to be focused on mutual prosperity, and prosperity comes from regional cooperation.
So we'll take some questions from this side of the room. Iraj, the lady beside you, two gentlemen with the beards at the back. So we start with the gentleman with the grey hair.
Thanks for the grey hair.
He didn't mention the glasses.
Mr. President, that was an enormously illuminating and stimulating talk you gave us. I was just wondering, as you were talking, how a thoughtful individual like you and somebody who's obviously so comfortable in the world of political theory and historical analysis, how does somebody with those characteristics actually have to deal with the day-to-day situation of, I grant you that it's obviously a very easy task, but nevertheless, how do you deal with the day-to-day situation of running a country that is beset with so many problems that go beyond theory and analysis?
And we'll take the lady beside and then the two gentlemen at the back.
Mr. President, I would like to first obviously strongly disagree with your answer to the first question. Obviously, everybody is entitled to their own opinion. And my question is, given the investment of so many tax aids and also the sacrifices the British soldiers has made into Afghanistan, and the country continue to remain one of the two top most corrupt countries in the world, and especially your recent decision to change the route of Solang, the route of Bamyan, the transmission line 500 kilowatt from Bamyan to Solang, despite the renowned Fitchner consultations or their assessment.
Excuse me, we've had enough, honestly, on this transmission
I need to ask
line.
my question.
Well, then ask it
yes.
quickly.
So that's the prime example of the corruption that you're part of it. And how do you think that will change if you're part of it? Thanks.
Okay. Then the gentleman at the back, providing it's not about the transmission line, and the gentleman beside him.
Assalamu alaikum, Risai Pakhair Rashi. My question is about the honesty of the Afghan government regarding peace talks. Actually, Hikmat Yar is one of the major jihadist party. Their delegation is roaming around in Kabul since 2 weeks. And it looks like nobody listening to them. And also Taliban says in some of their interviews that we are ready to talk directly with the Afghan government. But why you are approaching Pakistan to bring Taliban for peace table talks? Does that mean I mean, the Taliban, Pakistan should bring peace, or why we shouldn't approach Taliban directly? Thank you.
Yes, Stephen Carter, the head of the Afghanistan campaign at Global Witness. Also on corruption, Mr. President, it was a great pleasure to see the strong commitments that the Afghan government made at the corruption conference that's just been held in London, and particularly the commitment to publish to create a public register of beneficial ownership, which puts Afghanistan in a very august company among countries around the world. I wonder if you could perhaps talk a little bit about ways in which transparency specifically could be applied to the problem of corruption in Afghanistan. And I wonder if in his answer he could talk a little bit in particular about the mining sector, where we believe that the publication of contracts is a condition of their validity, the publication of beneficial ownership, perhaps most of all, the publication of production payment data, community monitoring, all these things can have a very positive impact. Given this sector, of course, is absolutely critical for Afghan growth and the increase of Afghan revenue and financial independence. Thank you.
So could I take those three?
Yes, I think we'll have to have no more questions, I'm afraid. So, if Mr. President, you could just answer those 4 questions.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Shukr. How do I organize my day? Well, on Saturdays, I preside over the Procurement Council. I've chaired 53 meetings of the Procurement Council. Because if you want to tackle corruption, you have to manage it. You cannot just lead. The first 30 meetings were heartbreaking. We did not find practically a single contract that complied with the law. And now we are changing. We saved about $400 million in the Ministry of Defense. From food contracts alone, we saved $50 million. Now contracts are becoming compliant. Sir Yari, sitting here, Yamayari, is our procurement director, and he's done a fantastic job. At the top of the system, it requires setting an agenda. We inherited one of the greatest scandals called the Kabul Bank. And the banking sector at that time was at the risk of implosion. What did I do? I read every single compliance report of every single bank, and I met every CEO for half an hour. The crisis is over. There are weaknesses, but the central bank is now in charge. We've recovered over $250 million from it. I preside over the National Security Council. Every National Security Council meeting involves 20 to 30 major decisions. Within our army, there had been no retirement since 2002. 90 generals were respectively retired on the basis of age. Now we're renewing the systems and processes. Infrastructure. The controversy that my dear compatriot, if she is still Afghan, and if you're British, you're still Afghan, so we're delighted to ask the question. Infrastructure, I had to do a portfolio review of all donor-based projects. Every single one of our own projects, donor finance projects, and Afghan government finance projects was reviewed. Ministry by ministry, sector by sector, and it's taken an immense amount of effort to release the money. We canceled, it's unheard of in the development business to cancel ongoing project. We canceled close to $1 billion and released the money for new things. Management of our water is critical. We're going to launch hopefully 29 dams. We have not launched a single new dam to completion in the last 15 years. Power sector, etc. So if I talk to you here wearing my analytic hat, don't forget, I worked 10 years at the World Bank, 5 years managing projects, in 5 years designing programs. I move easily from this word to that. And if you see me speaking Pashto or Dari, you would think you're dealing with an entirely different man. It takes, we are, as I told you, in a strategic situation. It requires different skills in different parts of my background. I'd spent 14 years looking at the last 600 years of Afghan history. I visited every single Afghan province prior to being elected at least twice and as many as 10 times. That's what enables me to function. Daily, 8 hours is pure agony, cut 1,000 times. 8 hours is building a house for the future. And I hope that generations that come will judge the effort to be worthwhile. This controversy, madam. First, the decisions are made 3 years ago. I've not changed the route. I've confirmed the request, the latest request of Fechner, that is February 1, 2016. 3 years ago, the then government of Afghanistan confirmed the decision. I'm willing to release all the records for all the world to see what was that decision. I was not part of that decision. And some of the individuals that are agitating were part of that discussion, in that decision. Second, the government of Afghanistan is signed an agreement for $216 million with the Asian Development Bank. Every agreement with the Asian Development Bank is a treaty. It was authorized by the then government of Afghanistan. I held the decision for 6 months because it did not answer provision of electricity to Bamyan. I approved the project on the cabinet based on firm guarantee, including $55 million of financing, that Bamyan will have electricity. If the Bamyan was scheduled for provision of electricity according to the very Fechner master plan that you quote in 2020, and it would have acquired it in 2022 or 2024. Now, under the new plan, Bamyan will be provided with electricity in 2018. Previously, the transmission line did not have a substation. It was just the transmission line. Today, Bamyan would have electricity from 4 sources: our own, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan. Bamyan's electricity needs are 30 megawatt. We are providing 300 megawatt. Please develop some thoroughness before you make accusations or before you call a patriot a racist. Or, I understand the anger of young people, but your pure emotions are being exploited. Please engage in a civic conversation. If you believe in democracy, then examine the facts and figures. If I've made the wrong decisions, or if a government, 6 million people are going to benefit from the current transmission line. If we delay this, there are going to be 3 years of delay, loss of close to $600 million of committed funds, and darkness for 6 million people. You make a judgment. 100,000 to 300,000 people are going to benefit from the other line. Please have a framework. Bamyan. The largest number of roads since I've become president have been allocated for Bamyan because my slope. Please, madam, you can shake your hands, but if you want figures, if you believe in your own myths, then you're entitled to it. But if you want facts and figures, the Minister of Public Works of Afghanistan is a Hazara. There's an 80-page report commissioned to give you every single project that is today working in central Afghanistan. Engage in a thorough dialogue and reach an understanding. There are 10 provinces of Afghanistan that have been neglected. And see which of these provinces, since I've become president, have received the greatest attention. But that's open for discussion, I hope. You will be entitled to your meeting, and I hope that the Afghan public will make. I've asked for a commission to inquire into all of this and to bring the facts to the attention of the people. On transparency, the last issue. First, our challenge in the mining sector is that we are faced with a curse of natural resources. In terms of large contracts, we've prevented it. But in terms of small contracts, it's a total mess. Because previously, a decision was made to allocate the decision rights for some of the small mines to the provincial directors, and there's a lot of abuse. The Afghan Group in Transparency, particularly Mr. Javed Noorani, has done a first-rate analysis. I am committed to publishing every single report on the mining sector, putting it on the web, and making sure that right scrutiny takes place. But what's our problem? The first problem is that there are not 10 people in the Afghan government who know project management and program management. So very small number of individuals are bearing an unbelievable burden. The system was patronage or based on past understandings. A lot of people who work in the mining ministry are product of a different era. This requires wholesale reorganization. We need to define the core function of every ministry. Except for Ministry of Defense and Finance, other ministries still have enormous difficulty in simple words describing why they exist. They argue that they exist because they've existed, not because they have a particular function to perform and that society needs to benefit from this. And when you get ministerial culture is both an enormous advantage of the 20th century legacy, but an enormous problem, because each ministry becomes a fiefdom, an interest group. Now, in terms of thinking nationally, it is important that we do this. Last point. Fortunately or unfortunately, we're in a commodity downturn. That gives us room to be able to prepare for 2017 in earnest, and all the assistance of EITI, the help of organizations like Columbia University Law School that did a great job with some of the African countries, Liberia, that they reviewed every single contract. We ask for help because the greatest unlevel playing field exists between mining companies and governments that do not have full understanding of law or the legalities. I hope that we can avoid the curse of natural resources, and I want to make sure next time you come to Afghanistan, you don't ski down the Salang Pass and risk your life again. So please don't do that, but otherwise come.
So that is what is called coolness under fire. Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you for all those wise words, and we wish you the best of luck with the challenges you face ahead. Now, ladies and gentlemen, would you remain seated while the President and his party leave? Pamakadai.
Thank you. Thank you.